Best roster in the country? We'll talk it over with Palmer Thoms from Dogs 247 Sports here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Bulldogs of Georgia. Palmer, how you doing today?
Doing well. You mentioned it. It's a very talented roster that Georgia's got this season, and just hopeful that we get to see it with everything that's been going on in the world. Just hoping to see some football this fall between the hedges.
Absolutely, absolutely. So more to come on that. There's going to be a vote here in about a week regarding a plan to put in place in regards to conditioning going right into fall camp. But we'll await that and talk Georgia football in the meantime. And we talk about all this talent. Well, the one talented guy that Georgia fans don't know a whole lot about unless they really, really dig into the tape and check over the games in the ACC is, of course, Jamie Newman. So let's start with him, quarterback position. Your thoughts about what you've heard, what you've seen. I'm sure you've looked at him a little bit more than you had before in regards to what he could possibly bring to the offense and how he's going to be utilized.
Yeah, I definitely have watched more Wake Forest football this offseason than I think I've ever watched, just looking into Jamie Newman and what he can do. And I think there's ample reason for Georgia fans to be excited with the offensive coordinator change to Todd Monken and the new philosophies that he can bring in. I think, bringing in a guy like Jamie Newman is just something that Georgia fans should really be ecstatic about. It's certainly a change from what has been the norm the last 3 seasons with Jake Fromm. We know that he hasn't, Jake Fromm wasn't the kind of guy that was going to, beat you with his legs. Newman is certainly, I wouldn't call him a guy that's going to beat you with his legs, but he has that dual threat capability. 574 yards on the ground, 6 touchdowns in 180 attempts. But, with what Georgia's got going on in the offensive change in philosophy with Todd Monken, I think, there's a lot of interesting things that they can do with a quarterback like Newman. I think you're going to see more RPO in this offense. You didn't really have the threat for, and some read option kind of stuff. You didn't really, like I said, you didn't really have the threat for Jake Fromm to take off and run. You've got that now with Jamie Newman. And so when you can combine that kind of threat, on the ground and through the air as well with 26 touchdowns, and over 2,500 yards last season with the Demon Deacons. When you can combine those two, the ability to throw the ball and the ability to run the ball with what Georgia's got in the backfield at running back, it's definitely something for fans to be excited about. We
broke down the JT Daniels acquisition with Palmer last week. We're still awaiting final eligibility for 2020. Please check out that video. It's a full quarterback room with or without JT Daniels. Who would you expect to be winning the backup quarterback job as of right now?
I mean, I look to Carson Beck as the guy there, true freshman coming in. If Daniels is eligible, then there's going to be a competition. I think there could be a competition at the top, but certainly for that backup spot. But if you throw Daniels out of the picture and you're just looking at what Georgia has in that room guaranteed for this season, Carson Beck seems like the guy to me. He was an Elite 11 quarterback out of Jacksonville. Georgia brought him in this year. He was their one quarterback that they brought in. You look at the recruiting class before that, they had Dwan Mathis, who had to redshirt due to some medical problems last season, and so he's going to be healthy this year. He could be in the mix, as well as Stetson Bennett, who served as Georgia's backup last season, has been with the program for several years now. Was with the team as a walk-on and then left the program and then came back last year as part of that recruiting class alongside Mathis. And so, there's definitely some competition in that room, but I think, the most talented guy among those 3 that I mentioned would have to be Beck. And, everything that he can bring to the table as a passer, is something that will look more familiar to Georgia fans than what Jamie Newman is. But I definitely think he has that ability to, take off and run more so than Jake Fromm did. And so, I would look to him as your number 2 guy without Daniels in the picture.
Breaking down the Georgia roster, we got Palmer Thoms on the line from Dogs 247 Sports. Of course, that is a brand name in college football. So check out Palmer's work right there. We're breaking down Georgia's roster, personnel on both sides of the ball. When we look at running backs and wide receivers, Palmer, there's just such a glut of talent. Zamir White's the headliner at running back. George Pickens was freshman of the year in the SEC by a ton of publications. So how do we differentiate the talent at running back or the talent at wide receiver versus what we've seen the last 3 to 4 years? Do we expect it to be just as good, or for some reason better, or just different?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different. At running back, it's a lot of the same. A lot of, very talented guys that were highly recruited out of high school. Zamir White being the former number one running back in his class. James Cook, very highly rated. Kenny McIntosh was a 4-star there. And then they're bringing in Kendall Milton as well, who was a highly ranked 4-star. I think it's a lot of the same at running back with guys that are just very highly thought of out of high school and, into the college ranks. You saw a taste of what that room would look like in the Sugar Bowl, given the fact that DeAndre Swift was banged up and believe he only had 1 carry, was in there for 2 or 3 plays. And Brian Herrien didn't make the trip with the team. So you saw a bunch of Zamir White, a bunch of James Cook, and got a little taste of McIntosh as well. I think that room is fully capable of being what Georgia has been in the past. Each of the last 3 seasons, the Bulldogs have had a 1,000-yard rusher. In 2017 and 2018, they had multiple. I think that room is certainly capable of putting up those numbers. At wide receiver, I think, you look at this room and there's a lot more excitement surrounding this room than there was going into last season. You had a lot of inexperience last year, and questions. The only experienced guy you had really was Lawrence Cager, who had done it at another program, transferring in from Miami. And then your top returning pass catcher was DeAndre Swift out of the backfield, and Tyler Simmons, who, had never been the guy. And so I think when you look at this wide receiver room this year, there's a lot more excitement about the group. You mentioned the headliner being Pickens, but you've got guys behind him as well that have did gain a ton of experience this past season. Demetrius Robertson, Dominic Blaylock, Matt Landers, Kyrus Jackson, guys like that. And then I think there's also a lot of excitement about the incoming freshmen at that position as well, with Arian Smith, Jermaine Burton, Marcus Rosemy. Those 3 guys really have a chance to make a name for themselves early on in Athens and contribute, because they bring so much to the table as highly ranked guys out of high school as a part of Georgia's number 1 ranked class. I think there's a lot of excitement about those guys and what they can do.
Pickens with 49 catches last year and Robertson with 30. Palmer, when you look at the group of athletes, talking skill position, game changers all over the place or potential game changers, is there a guy between the running backs, wide receivers, will group in the tight ends as well, anybody who touches the football that maybe has been a little bit underutilized the last couple of years, or is an incoming freshman that, so we haven't seen him much, maybe a handful of catches or something, that you're really looking forward to seeing more of?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Pickens. I'm certainly excited to see more of him. He did lead the team in catches last season, led the team in yards, but when Lawrence Cager was healthy, Lawrence Cager was the number 1 guy. He only played 9 games last season, so really it was late in the season that fans really got to see what Cager was all about, especially in that Sugar Bowl. But even then, late in the season, he was suspended for the first half of the SEC championship game due to getting in the fight against Georgia Tech. Missed the first half of that game for a violation of team rules and only played 1 quarter against the Yellow Jackets. So I think there's a lot that Pickens can still bring to the table, and even returning as the team leader in receptions and in yards. I think there's a lot that he can bring. But I'm going to look to Demetrius Robertson. I think he's a guy that, he did it at Cal before transferring to Georgia. He put up those big numbers in the Pac-12. And I think there's a lot of excitement about what he can bring to the table with his speed, his elusiveness, his ability to make some plays He's been underutilized a little bit at Georgia, and I think some of that would be on him. I think, his first year he had some difficulty learning the playbook. Coming in, he came in late, and so was declared eligible late, and so I think there was a lot thrown at him really quickly that first season, and then last season, you just never saw it formulate. He was a little banged up, had some issues with some nagging injuries. Played in 13 games with 333 yards, 30 receptions, and I think if thinking back on Georgia's season last year, he made an impact in the season opener against Vanderbilt, and I think there was a lot of excitement about what he could be. He had a touchdown in that game. He had a big reception. Believe it went for a touchdown that was called back due to holding. And he was one of the guys that people were really excited about. In the James Coley offense, what he could be. And after that, you never really saw him have a huge game. I think there's a lot of excitement about what he could still be. And this would be, quote unquote contract year for him. His senior year, he's got the speed, he's got some intangibles, and he's got to, really prove to people outside of the Georgia program, in the Georgia program as well, what he can do beyond college football.
We're getting you set for 2020 here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, running through the rosters of all the major teams. We've got Michigan, Texas posted along with Nebraska and Maryland. We've worked on Auburn, Florida, talking Georgia with Palmer Thompson, many more to go here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. The offensive line's been one of the best in the business the last few years. That has to do with recruiting, but also player development. Sam Pittman moving on to Arkansas as the head coach. Your thoughts about the offensive line? Would that be the biggest concern that you have? Just not in regards to the talent leveling off at all, but that's just a different position, because you need usually you don't have guys step on the field as freshmen and play as offensive linemen. There's more of a development curve. And number two, they got to work in chemistry and in sync with each other more than any other unit on the field. So it's not just, okay, we got five stars, we can roll them out and we've got a great offensive line. There's just so much more to it. That would that be the concern?
Yeah, I don't know that it would necessarily be a concern as much as, a question. What exactly this offensive line may look like. Like you mentioned, Sam Pittman moving on. There's some change in philosophies when you bring in a new offensive line coach and Matt Luke. But what Sam Pittman did so well at Georgia was he recruited really well and he developed players really well. Well, that's going to benefit Georgia this year. The fact that he recruited really well and brought in very talented guys, those guys are now, being called up and saying, having to be filling the shoes of two former, 2 first-round picks on the offensive line, another in Solomon Kinley that went a little bit later, and a transfer in Cade Mays that played all 5 positions across the line. And so, the talent and the player development is certainly a big storyline there. But, you mentioned that they've got to build that cohesiveness. And I think, that's where you really miss out on those 15 spring practices. Georgia was one of the programs that didn't start spring practice before all the coronavirus stuff hit. And, I think you could see, not necessarily a slow start, but, by Georgia standards, these last couple of seasons on the offensive line, they haven't given up many sacks. They haven't, been, that hasn't been a question mark for them. When you've got, the bookends and Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson, like I said, 2 first-round picks at tackle, there aren't many questions there. Those guys are both gone, and, now you've got to replace them with likely Jamari Salyer on one of the tackle positions, and then, the other opposite of him will be a question. Could it be, a true freshman in Broderick Jones, Tate Ratledge, or Chad Lindbergh? Likely 2 more guys that could have their chance at that position would be redshirt freshmen Xavier Truss and Warren McClendon. So, I think the tackle positions, you look at it, that's the biggest question mark on the offensive line. They've got some talent and, some experience on the interior, returning Trey Hill at center, who started every game at that position last season. Ben Cleveland at right guard, who made several starts, rotating in and out with Cade Mays, and Cleveland has been the guy before, so there's really no question with him there. And then at left guard, you've got Justin Schaefer, who started a couple of games last season with Kinley out due to an injury. I think the interior, you've got a lot of confidence in them given their experience. And I think you have a lot of confidence in the exterior guys given their talent, but they're just going to have to prove themselves with some experience.
Defense at Georgia comes to mind in regards to just sheer talent. We saw a few of Mark Richt's teams that were just over the top. Lorenzo Carter, Roquan Smith, obviously leading the defense that almost won a national championship in 2017. Alec Ogletree and Jarvis Jones on that 2012 team that was so outstanding. So talent, again, not in question, certainly under Kirby Smart's reign here in recruiting. But could this potentially be the best Georgia defense that we've ever seen based on that talent recruitment, but also with so many guys coming back, as you've outlined for us this offseason, not losing a whole lot of talent to the NFL for one of the few times this past offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at what Georgia was this past season, and they were an incredible defense. They, gave up they stopped the run really well. They were the number one scoring defense. They didn't give up big plays. I guess the one thing that you would look to would be they didn't create a ton of turnovers. But when you're not, when you're getting off the field so quickly, they didn't need to create the turnovers. And so, with how highly thought of they were this past season and how much they return, it certainly is a possibility that they could be better. And that this could be one of the best Georgia defenses fans have ever seen. You look at that defense, you had only one player drafted, which is kind of incredible given the fact that how good they were, that the only player picked from that defense was the Mr. Irrelevant in the draft. Tay Crowder, linebacker, went to the New York Giants. You do lose J.R. Reed in the secondary, Tyler Clark up front, along with a couple other guys, David Marshall and Michael Barnett. But you're replacing them, like you said, with the Kirby Smart recruiting over the last couple of seasons, 4 straight top 3 classes, finishing 1, 2, and 1 the last 3. You're replacing them with guys that are equally thought of, highly thought of out of high school. What was great about Georgia's defense last year is they were a little bit of a self-proclaimed no-name defense because, like I said, they have so much experience. They had so many guys rotating in and out that there really wasn't that one guy that you look to. There wasn't a Roquan Smith. There wasn't, what Georgia has had in the past where you look to them on defense and you say, that's the guy. There was no the guy this past season. And I think, with how many guys they have, you return a lot of that. So they're replacing a couple starters, around on the field, but you're replacing them with guys that got minutes, got snaps that a lot of teams starters were getting. So, I mean, up front, Jordan Davis is a player to watch, Malik Herring, Trayvon Walker, Devontae Wyatt, and then incoming freshman Jalen Carter. He's likely to be in the rotation. He's a super talented player coming in. At linebacker, you do return leading tackler Monty Rice in the middle. You're probably going to pair him with Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, Channing Tindall. That group of 4 is probably going to be rotating in and out. You saw those guys playing last season with Tay Crowder as well. Outside linebacker, it's the same group. They didn't lose anybody. So Azeez Ojulari, Nolan Smith, Jermaine Johnson, Adam Anderson, Robert Beal, and Walter Grant. You return all 6 of your crucial guys outside linebacker. And with that position being led by defensive coordinator Dan Lanning, I think there's a lot to be excited about with that group and the kind of pressure that they can put on the quarterback. And then in the secondary, I mentioned you do lose J.R. Reed, but right alongside him has been Richard LeCount. He was a part of, felt like almost every Georgia turnover last season, whether it was an interception, forced fumble, recovered fumble. He was a ball hawk. He was always there and always had a say in who was putting on those Savage pads. He's back, and he's going to be the leader in that secondary as a 3-year starter, a 4-year contributor. You are replacing Reed, as I mentioned, but you're doing so with a highly rated kid out of high school, Lewis Seen, who started the Sugar Bowl last season as Reed missed the game due to an injury. At cornerback, you're bringing back the 3 guys that were your main guys last season. You can really only can start 2 in a base package, but Georgia's got 3 guys that could get drafted after this season, and Eric Stokes, Tyson Campbell, and DJ Daniel. And then, I think you look at college football these days and how much, dime and nickel package, how many of those package defensive backs are on the field at times. That's a really important position, and Georgia's returning their guys there as well. They've got Tyreek Stevenson, who was a highly rated 5-star coming out of high school. As a cornerback, he kind of developed his role at star alongside Mark Webb, who's also returning, who was the number 5 tackler on the team last season. And then you've got guys that have made contributions before in Devon Wilson, Chris Smith. Guys like that are always important to your secondary because you are putting so many defensive backs out there at times. And, when you've got 5, 6, 7 defensive backs on the field, you need to have the depth at that kind of position. And Georgia certainly has that.
LeCount with 4 picks, 3 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, to your point there on him being around the football. Just so many guys that you just mentioned, 10 or 15 players that are generally all 4 and 5 stars. But if somebody's going to watch a Georgia football game and they can possibly expect one guy just to wreck the game for the opposing offense, is that Nakobe Dean? Is that Nolan Smith? If you could just pick one guy that could just be a game wrecker, who would that guy be?
I'm going to go Azeez Ojulari at the outside linebacker position. He's a guy that will put his hand in the dirt as a defensive end. In some passing situations, he'll stand up as an outside linebacker at other times. He was really in the backfield a lot last season. Totaled 36 tackles last year, and was second on the team in tackles for loss with 6. Was a team leader in quarterback pressures. And hurries. You all preseason for Georgia, you heard them emphasizing havoc, getting to the quarterback, forcing the offense to be uncomfortable. And a big key to that was quarterback hurries and quarterback pressures. Now, I don't know whether Georgia's stat keepers were giving them the benefit of the doubt on when they were hurrying the quarterback, but Azeez Ojulari was in the backfield, getting to quarterbacks, making them uncomfortable, making them make throws. And, he returns this year. I expect big things out of Azeez Ojulari.
Well, if there's going to be one team that we're not going to forget the kickers on, it's, of course, going to be the 2019 Bulldogs, because they had one of the very best in Rodrigo Blankenship, finished his career 27 of 33 for that final season at 82%. Jake Camarda, as well as your punter, he moves on after punting 61 times. Is that going to be a free-for-all? Camarda's back. Okay.
Yeah. With Camarda, he was recruited out of high school. He did kick in high school. He was ranked as a punter, but, I think there's a chance you could see some overlap there. He kicked in the spring game in 2019, gave Rodrigo Blankenship a blow there, and made a 49-yard field goal. So I think, there's a chance you could see him as your place kicker. He's certainly going to be handling the punting duties, averaging, incredible punting last season. Really helped Georgia, take their punting unit from, he was the starter as a freshman, and I believe they were like 80th in the country. They, in punting, and, last season as a sophomore, he helped them improve to like 8th or 9th in the country as in that category. So I think, there's a lot of pressure on him in that room, given the fact that, like you said, Rodrigo Blankenship is gone. Your special teams coordinator in Scott Fountain is gone, and he's being replaced by Scott Sinclair, the former, Scott Cochran, the former strength and conditioning coordinator at Alabama. This is going to be his first on-field coaching position. So I think a lot of pressure is going to be on the old man in the room, the upperclassman, a junior punter in Jake Camarda. Like I said, he could be the guy at kicker, or you could be looking at freshman Jared Zirkle to come in and kick. I think there's going to be a competition there. Kirby Smart preaches competition, and I think kicker is certainly going to be one of those positions. And I think it's going to be interesting to see who's that guy replacing Rodrigo Blankenship, because there's certainly big shoes to fill.
Okay, folks, is this the most talented roster in the nation? Leave your comments below. And we appreciate, as always, the contribution from Palmer Toms. Please join his work at Dogs 247 Sports. Georgia going to be a major factor, as they have been for the past 3 years on the national scene, and certainly in the SEC, as they've owned the division 3 consecutive years. Palmer, we appreciate you stopping by, getting us set for Georgia football.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. And happy to be coming on.